We are going to get into our main program. All right, I am going to introduce Katie Ross, who is, all right, I have her bio here from her website. She is the owner and operator, along with her husband, of North Georgia Native Nursery. Used to be called Night Song Native Nursery. You may know it by that name in Canton. Katie has over 20 years working in the plant and nursery industry. She's worked for several nurseries throughout Georgia, has an associate degree in environmental horticulture, a bachelor's degree in psychology, and a master's degree in education. Interesting combination. Katie first became interested in native plants out of high school, and she's always promoted them as a hardier and better alternative to non-natives while working in the nursery industry. She is a Georgia certified plant professional, and together with her husband, they work to build a more sustainable native plant nursery and to educate the public about the importance of native plants and what they play in the environment. So thank you, Katie, for coming here. I'm going to bring up her slide. Y'all give her a warm welcome, and I'll bring up her slide.
So, can y'all hear me? Night Song Nursery was the name of our nursery from 2015 till January 1st of this year. We updated to be North Georgia Native Nursery. People go, oh, I love Night Song, and I loved it too, but people were calling us Native Song, and I couldn't find you in a Google search, and it was just easier to update it to North Georgia Natives. So my presentation today is the native landscape using native plants to promote biodiversity in urban and suburban spaces. So basically what we're going to talk about is the importance of bringing nature into our own landscapes in our yards. So why native plants? You know what, first of all, let me ask a question. How many of you are familiar with the concept of native plants? Good. A lot of times I'll give presentations and people are like, what's a native plant? What does that mean? So a native plant means it was here before the Europeans started bringing plants over from Europe back in the 1600s. Some native plants, so a plant could be native to the United States, but maybe not native to Georgia or the Southeast, or it could be native to a part of the Southeast and not native to another part. We grow a lot of coastal plain plants that are maybe native further south, but they'll still do okay up here. So the term native is kind of, it's a spectrum. So why are native plants important? Native plants have co-evolved with the native insect species on this continent for thousands, if not millions of years. Through this long process of coevolution, herbivorous insects, which are insects that eat plants, like caterpillars, grasshoppers, and beetles, are able to recognize and feed on native plants. So 90% of these herbivorous insects are specialists. So we have specialists and we have generalists. Specialists require a specific genus of plants. The poster child of a specialist is the Monarch Butterfly. And I'm guessing y'all seem pretty informed, so I'm guessing you are probably aware of what's going on with the monarch butterflies. The huge decline in population, 97%. So monarch butterflies require milkweed, anything in the Asclepias genus. So I like to get back to the basics with this when we talk about natives. Something that's so easily forgotten is the food web. The natural occurrence every day, that's something we just so easily forget, is how native plants play a role. So all life begins with the sun. How many of you think about that regularly? You know, like all energy is created with the sun. We kind of forget that. We learned that in elementary school and then we move on. So all energy starts with the sun, and then plants are what take that energy and convert it into a usable form to go up the food chain. So now a native plant is going to be able to be consumed by an insect. Non-native plants that are not from this area are not going to be recognized as a food source by insects because they did not co-evolve with them. So we have here a picture of the sun, providing energy to the flower. So we'll say that's a little violet. Being consumed by a caterpillar, being consumed by a frog, a snake, and on up to the owl. So now let's take that violet and let's pretend that's a loropetalum, or something that's not a recognized food source to the insects here in the southeast. Basically, you take that plant and you can just stop. There is no more movement of energy of the food chain. So, native plants and native plant landscapes are places where we have wildlife, where we have human interactions with wildlife, where they're places of genetic diversity, biodiversity, learning, a source of beauty and enjoyment, and a place for us to all relax. Native plant landscapes are beautiful and they serve a purpose. These spaces need not and cannot exist elsewhere. These places have to start existing in our landscapes because elsewhere no longer exist. When I grew up in the 1980s, I grew up in Atlanta, and the mountains, we go up to the mountains. That was where we go see nature. We're going to go up to the mountains for the weekend. We're going to go see some nature. We were thinking that we're seeing nature in our backyards, although we clearly were. We just thought that that was the other place. Well, now we all live in those other places. The population has gotten to a point that we're not just, we're taking over. So we need to be bringing nature back into our landscapes, into places that are developed. Gardening and landscaping to support wildlife is a necessity that must occur in these developed areas, and replacing non-native trees and plants and landscape with native species must happen if we are to avoid localized extinction of insects and birds. So most of y'all are probably familiar with the songbird count has come down a lot over the past 20 plus years. That's because we're removing their food sources. Habitat loss has occurred due to the growth and development, but also the introduction of non-native invasive plant and insect species. So native plants are for the birds. Songbirds need protein from caterpillars and insects, not just from seeds and berries, to fledge their young. 96% of birds are reared exclusively on insects. Lepidoptera, which are the moths, the skippers, and the butterflies that evolved on this continent, need the plants they evolved with in order to host the caterpillars.
And I just want to interject. I think this is really important point that a lot of people will say, well, I see, butterflies, or I see birds eating the berries off of Nandina, for example. And you may see that, and they do eat it, but it doesn't help in the rearing of the young. So there's this other part of the life cycle of the birds that is not supported by the berries.
Right. Yep. We'll get to that.
So these are the top 10 trees and shrubs that support Lepidoptera, which are your butterflies, your moths, and your skippers. According to Doug Tallamy, which Doug Tallamy is kind of the godfather of what we're doing now with the native plant movement. How many of y'all are familiar with Bringing Nature Home? One person? Oh, goody. Okay, so y'all, you've got to get this book, Bringing Nature Home. I usually have it with me, but I'm incredibly unprepared today. Doug Tallamy, Bringing Nature Home, write that book down. It is the most inspiring book. It's one of the reasons I started my nursery. Doug Tallamy is a entomologist from the University of Delaware, and he's done so many studies on plant-insect interactions. So according to his work, the oak tree is the top, so especially a white oak. They can host over 500, I think the number's much higher now, 534 species of Lepidoptera, which, let's remember, Lepidoptera the caterpillars are the food source for birds. So an oak tree is going to host the most species. Then we have the willows, 456, cherries, 456. Look down here, a blueberry. We think of blueberries attracting birds, and everybody says, oh, my blueberries are always being eaten by birds. Well, birds aren't only on your blueberries to eat the fruit, they're also there to eat the caterpillars that are living on the plant. And the baby birds, the fledglings that are living in the nest, they require the protein from the insects. So how many Lepidoptera would you guess, say, Japanese Zelkova might host, which is a very popular landscape plant? They host 0. Ginkgo biloba, very common tree, was believed to host 1 or 2, or 0, but now it's 1 to 2. They found it could actually host on a ginkgo tree. Crepe myrtles, they host none. So when we remove the native plants and we replace them with plants that aren't native, then you're taking away the food source for all of the Lepidoptera. So if you plant it, they will come. Here's a picture of a black-throated blue warbler on an American beautyberry. So American beautyberry is a fantastic plant. I don't have any with me today, but it is a tall shrub. Red fruit, has a lot of flowers for pollinators. The leaves can be crushed up, and you can use them as an insect deterrent. Yellow finch on a purple cone flower. That little finch, how many of you think the little finch is there just for the seeds? He is there for the seeds, but you know what else he's eating? The little tiny insects that are down inside the seed heads. And then if you plant a tiger swallow, or if you plant the hairy leafcup, you're going to be covered up in swallowtails. So if you want to see monarch butterflies, you're going to need to plant milkweed. Monarchs need their milkweed. And there's a milkweed for just about every garden situation or landscape situation. There is the butterfly milkweed, likes full sun, drier conditions, grows a lot in pastures. White milkweed likes moisture, a little more shade. There's poke milkweed, which grows well in the shade. There's rose milkweed, which grows well with more sun and moisture. There's so many beautiful milkweeds. And if you want to see the fritillary butterflies, or fritillary, however you want to say it, then you're going to need to plant passion flowers. Passiflora lutea is a great shade passion flower, and the Passiflora incarnata is maypop. That's another great full sun vine. You're going to need those as the host plant for them. And one of the first plants that I ever saw as a kid is the Passiflora incarnata. It was a maypop. It was growing on a fence. And I was probably my daughter's age, like 8 or 9. And I was like, what on earth is that alien thing? It looked crazy. And it is just a gorgeous plant. And if you want to see spicebush caterpillars, which are, to me, one of the cutest caterpillars, I love all caterpillars. But they look like little lizards or little snakes, and they'll curl up in the leaves. And if you want to see those adorable little caterpillars, then you will need to plant spicebush. Spicebush is a great shade, moist to well-drained soil shrub, and it's a requirement for spicebush swallowtails. They'll also sometimes host on sassafras, but if you want to grow those butterflies, you will need the plant. You'll need the host plant. So habitat loss. Where will all the wild things go when all the wild places are all gone? So here's a picture of flying over the Atlanta airport. This is something we're all very familiar with. Urban sprawl. You have these fragmented places where there's still some woodlands, but really that's not very usable for wildlife. It's better than 0, but not much better. And we have habitat loss from invasive plant species, which somebody asked if we were going to talk about that. I can't not talk about that. A lot of the invasive plants that we have today were once planted for ornamental, livestock, or land use purposes. And these invasive plants have been taking over and destroying these urban, suburban, and rural areas. Privet, kudzu, bamboo, English ivy, mimosa, Bradford pear, Japanese honeysuckle, we all know these. Here's a picture down here of the kudzu taking over. It's a very familiar southern picture. Looks like a bunch of wild animals kind of like covered like swamp things. Privet, y'all are probably all very familiar with privet. Japanese honeysuckle. Oh no, some of my slides are missing. But did you also know that Mahonia, Miscanthus, Nandina domestica, butterfly bush, barberries, birding bush, crepe myrtles, Rosa Sharon, Elaeagnus, Japanese spirea, Vinca major and minor, daylilies, lantana, and liriope are also all listed on invasive.org as either invasive or potentially becoming invasive plant species.
That's everything we have.
Exactly. Yeah, and these are all found at your garden centers.
Deer.
Sorry?
A lot of what's up there is the only thing that will survive deer.
Sort of.
What do you plant in this world up here to survive
We'll get to that.
deer?
We'll get to that. Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah. So let's talk about the once sterile, non-invasive, stays where you plant it, Bradford Pear. So back in the 80s, oh, no.
Oh, go back.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, how? There we go.
This is a very familiar image. Driving down the road in the springtime, especially up Interstate 85 or really anywhere, you'll see the white flowering plants in any disturbed areas. So these are all Pyrus Caloriana. Pyrus Caloriana Bradford was a cultivar of calorie pear that was first introduced back, I believe, in the 50s and 60s, but really gained popularity as a landscape tree, fast growing, flowers in the spring, easy to grow. Anybody can grow it anywhere. And they were sold like crazy. I've sold probably hundreds of them throughout my career back many years ago. We sold them as a sterile pear, and people were always confused, like, how could a pear be sterile? I don't understand. Well, it wasn't able to cross with any other pears. It didn't have the same background genetics, so it was just a plant that you could plant and it would stay where it was. Well, this wonderful fast-growing landscape plant grew so fast that the wood would break very easily. So y'all are probably all familiar with Bradford pears. Oh, they break. They do, because they grow so fast. So to help with that, there was an introduction of a new cultivar of Pyrus Caloriana that was supposed to not break, be a little different, because everybody in the hort industry, we love anything novel and new. So they introduced a new cultivar of Pyrus Caloriana. However, unfortunately, the new cultivar shared similar genetics with the Bradford, and they were able to cross-pollinate. I remember my father going against my advice, never showed any interest in planting plants, and one day I come home and he had planted 3 Bradford pears in the yard, and I was like, what on earth? So a few years after that, I came back home and I was like, what is going on with this pear tree? It has a fruit on it. I don't understand. These are supposed to be sterile. Well, the fruit are only about that big. And I was like, it's like a light bulb memory for me. I remember looking at it and going, that is so weird. And then went on with my life. That was probably 20 years ago. Well, as it turns out, birds love to eat those fruit. And we think, well, that's good, right? We're feeding the birds with it. Well, the birds spread the seed. The plant grows very quickly. It will also colonize. And it takes over a space. And then remember we talked about the Lepidoptera and the importance of how native plants are recognized because they co-evolved with the native insects. They're not recognizable. Pyrus Caloriana, being a plant from Asia, is not recognizable to Lepidoptera. So they don't see that as a food source. So nothing can host on it. So the plant doesn't have any pathogens or really anything that's currently keeping it in check like it would back in Asia. So we have a new invasive plant that was created by us. Does anybody have any questions about that? I know it's kind of a little, yeah, okay. So diseases and pests that have been introduced by us. We say the nursery industry, but really by us, because for our need for novel plants. Chestnut Blight back in 1904 was introduced when by Japanese nursery stock because somebody thought that a Japanese chestnut would be super great and different than the regular boring old native American chestnut. So when they brought that over, Chestnut Blight was introduced. Hemlock woolly adelgid, y'all are familiar. You have hemlocks here, yes, a few, okay. The white cottony little adelgids underneath, that was brought over from Asia on the, I guess it was a Japanese hemlock. I'm not 100% which hemlock. But that was brought over in the 1920s. Citrus greening disease, spread by the Asian citrus psyllid. It's got a pretty big impact on the citrus industry. Basically what happens is the little insect goes in and it introduces a pathogen, and then the fruit aren't able to fully develop, so they just fall off green. And then sudden oak death. Now that's one that I remember. This is one that I remember coming over back in it would have been the late 90s. And it really, I was like, what? I've never heard of such a thing. But the sudden oak death was first discovered in 1995. They don't know where it came from. We don't know. We can't blame another country for it because we don't know where it came from. But it was almost spread from the west coast here to the east coast back in 2004 when a shipment of rhododendrons and camellias were recognized to have the pathogen on it. Massive loss of oaks in the west coast. That could have spread here just through our nursery stock. I mean, how preventable is that? We just don't bring in nursery stock from other parts of the country. So traditional landscape maintenance versus our natural landscapes. Traditional methods are more unsustainable. They require more inputs like gasoline, man-hours, pesticides, and fertilizers. Have lots of large outputs like air pollution from the exhaust, water pollution through runoff, and noise pollution. I, for one, can't stand the sound of a leaf blower. I kind of start shaking when I hear it. Right? Yeah, whoever said that, exactly. When you go to a neighborhood, there's leaf blowers everywhere. So management of native landscapes is less impactful, less expensive, and uses fewer resources. And I tell people, just talk to your landscapers. They really want to most of them want to make you happy. They want you to be pleased with them, and you're paying them. So they will do what you ask. But they just don't know. So, for instance, I hired a guy to cut our grass, which was, to me, like the world's biggest treat because we're on 12 acres. I have a nursery on part of my property, and I work down there 7 days a week, spring through fall. And my husband on Sundays would have to cut our grass. And so then when are we going to go do family stuff? So we splurged this year, and we hired a guy to come cut our grass. Well, I came home one afternoon. I heard him up there. I was like, what is he doing? And I come back, and I'm like, what are you doing? He was going in and just cutting all my perennials down. I was like, whoa! You remember that, don't you? But he didn't know. He was just trying to make me happy. He was like, I thought you wanted this to be like this. I was like, no, these are all important to me. First of all, I got to collect the seeds. That's what I do for my business. So just communicating with them, instead of blowing all the leaves into a bag and putting them out by your curb, blow them into a bed, blow them somewhere where they can just decompose. So the native landscape can look tidy and neat. Over the past few years, the native plant world has gotten a little bit of blowback with people saying, oh, they're just too messy. Native plants just look so messy. And I'm here to tell you they definitely can. They can get very aggressive and out of control. Come to my yard. I mean, it gets wild. But they can be maintained, and there are certain ways of landscaping, especially HOAs or places where, you're required to keep a tidy front yard. I've got an answer for most of those problems. We've got different cultivars or different species that are grown to be smaller. They just need to be used in the right places. And then places where things that do grow more aggressively and get bigger, put them in your backyard or put them somewhere you can keep control of them. So maintaining and defining bed lines. These are different ways to kind of make it look more neat and tidy. So maintain and define bed lines. That goes with any landscape. Having a nice defined bed line is important. Mass plantings and drifts to give the space purpose. So a lot of times when my new customers come in, they'll say to me, you know, I want one of everything. And I'm like, well, I get that, but let's think this through. Okay, you've got a bed and you want to make it look good. Putting one of everything's going to look a little crazy. So then they'll say, well, I want two of everything. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work either. So let's think more. You've got an area. Let's try and do 3, 5, 7, 9. Let's do masses. Do 2 species instead of, 7. So larger numbers of fewer species is another way to make it look more planned and more organized. Using planters and raised beds to define a space. And meadow gardens maintain a mowed area or a mowed strip around the garden that defines the area. It's called a cue to care. So it looks like, oh yeah, they are actually maintaining that. I might not get it, but they're doing something with it. Maintain a line of sight to the house and other key features that you would like to draw the eye to. So if you're landscaping your front yard, don't put a great big tree right in front of your door unless you don't want people seeing your door. Or a window. Frame the window with plants, don't block it. That's kind of common sense, but a lot of times that gets forgotten. And turf. Turf is actually, a small amount of turf, or whatever size you need for turf, is actually, it's great. A lot of people, am I not being loud enough?
Yeah, just say it's close.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that way.
Gotcha. So turf is important for the way we live today, right? I have kids, I have dogs, I need grass. So turf is excellent in landscaping, but just add other stuff. And it's in design, turf is a great place for your eye to rest. So as you have like all your colorful stuff, having a green area kind of gives you a more restful appearance. Okay. And signage or certifications of landscapes. That helps to also convey the message of what you're doing to your neighbors and other people. This is a really old slide, or PowerPoint, I apologize. But there's different signage that you can put out and people will see it and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. This is a wildlife area. Gotcha. So working towards beauty and harmony in your landscape. Make peace with the fact that there is nothing perfect in life and neither should our landscapes be. If you or your HOA insist on a perfect front yard, make your backyard a more natural area for you. Choose plants that are not listed as invasive species and beware of the new introductions from Asia and Europe because they are still coming in. Never buy plants that have been treated with systemic pesticides. They will kill the insects you're trying to attract. And over here you'll see this little white tag. It says this plant is protected from problematic aphids, whiteflies, beetles, mealybugs, and other unwanted pests by neonicotinoids. I pulled that tag out of a blueberry. So at a large box store. So they're basically saying that any insect that comes to this and feeds on this plant will die, which is true. That's what neonicotinoids do, to a degree. The pesticide neonicotinoids, they've been found in the soil from once a plant's been removed. They've been found in the pollens. They've been found in the fruits. I think they've a lot of growers have decided like, okay, it got a lot of bad press. We're going to back off on using them, but still a lot of plants are grown with them. So buy from growers who can guarantee you that they do not use synthetic pesticides, or if they do, they're well versed in the methods that cause limited ecological damage. So IPM, integrated pest management, is a term that we use that means you basically don't just blanket pesticides all over your plants. You go out and you monitor them, and then you treat them when you see them. Leave the leaves, don't deadhead, quit pruning everything, and enjoy the little creatures you're going to attract. The little Cope's gray tree frog there, found him in the leaves. So, and if you love it, please plant it. I don't want to tell anybody, you know, when I first started with my native nursery, I was like, you got to only plant native plants. But I mean, I come from many generations of Georgian gardeners. My mom lives in my great-grandmother's house, and we have plants that she planted, and none of them are native. But they're important. Our plants mean a lot to us. We love our gardenias, we love our hydrangeas, we love our roses. We love different plants that maybe our mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and fathers had planted. And if you love it, enjoy it, plant it. But also plant natives along with it, so you're feeding wildlife. And that's not the name of my nursery anymore. But what we are working towards still, and we will continue to always work towards, for our gold standard, is to have locally sourced, open pollinated, seed-grown plant material to capture local ecotype and genetic diversity. So we are trying to do as much sourcing of local ecotypes, local seeds, to be able to be sure we're capturing the genetics of Georgia to provide for our customers. And we're doing it all mostly organically. We're not, this is old. I do use things that are not or some synthetic fertilizers. I don't use any pesticides, but I do use a few synthetic fertilizers. And if you're going to tinker with the earth, at least keep all of the pieces. That's Aldo Leopold. And that is it. Yes?
I got a question going back to the diseases that have come in. Mountain laurel, we have a whole bunch, I mean, we live in mountain laurel, and I noticed there's some type of black spot that's killing the mountain laurel. What can we do about it?
I don't know what it is. Because I'm not, I would find out what it is first. Do y'all have your, any relationship with your county extension or anything like that?
Yes.
They should know.
Right.
Yeah, they should know.
It seems like it's killing the leaves and then they sort of die off. If you're on Beaver Run, guys, there's a whole segment of it that is dying.
Yeah.
That's mountain laurel.
Okay, yeah, there could be a couple things that is. I would definitely look into that. Remove it, sterilize between any, no. If it's on your property, remove what you can of it. I don't know what it is, if it's a fungus or a bacteria, or it would be different treatments for whatever.
Another question. Yeah. The hemlock trees, we've done the treatment of the hemlocks for the next 5 years, I think. But I noticed in other areas around Big Canoe and even in Bent Tree, there are gigantic hemlock trees. How come they didn't get diseased?
They've probably been treated.
Yeah.
I've been treating mine for 15 years, probably.
It's you. Okay.
Yeah. Yes?
I appreciate you letting us plant our gardenias. I think it's really important when you said it's okay to do that, that just because it's non-native does not mean it's invasive.
Correct,
But,
yes.
but we want to avoid planting those things that we may love that do become invasive,
Yes.
like the burning bushes and the mahonias, and they're just spreading like.
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
point. So yes, one thing I usually do clarify is if you love it, plant it as long as it's not an invasive plant. Butterfly bush, which I didn't have any of my slides in this one, unfortunately. Butterfly bush is definitely an invasive plant. Hasn't always been, and people hate to hear that, but I'm sorry, it is. It's going to be starting to become a problem. I have slides with pictures showing it coming out of the cracks of buildings in England. It's I had some across the street from me growing in a ditch, and I don't even know where a butterfly bush would be anywhere near me, except probably at somebody's house way away. So it's one of the up and coming invasive plants. So avoid planting butterfly bushes.
I'm confused. Butterfly bushes equal monarch butterflies.
No. So butterfly bush is not. No, a butterfly bush is buddleia.
Okay.
Yeah,
Milkweed.
Asclepias is milkweed. Yes, yes.
That's a good
great question because so many people come to me and they say, "Well, I thought butterfly bushes were native," because they get pollinator plant confused with butterfly with native plant. So pollinator plants are not necessarily a native plant.
Butterfly weed.
Butterfly wheat, yes, butterfly wheat is Asclepias tuberosa, and it's native. Yep.
Are all native plants, are native plants susceptible to moles and voles?
Oh, yeah.
How do you know what to plant and not to plant?
Well,
There's different things you can do. I like to use Permatil's a good product. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's a little rocky baked granite. It's got some sort of sharp edges. They hit that, they go the other direction. So when you plant, you can, I know like moles and voles will get into, I mean, I've dealt with them. I don't have a good answer for that. I just say when you plant something, mix in Permatil, or you can trench with Permatil. That'll help. Metal sheeting helps.
Find your good cat.
Get you a cat.
Although cats outside are not a good idea, because cats outside actually are really damaging to native wildlife. They eat all the birds, they eat the
Put out and feed the birds.
You need to look at her yard.
Yeah.
It's very wide. It's like walking into the woods.
good. That's great.
And it's very large. It's not, there's no grass. There's nothing like that.
That's good.
Any other questions?
That grass that we're always pulling up.
Stilt grass. It's Dora's favorite thing. Do you have extra free samples of that today?
seed, yeah.
Add it up, what do we put in its place?
So yeah, stilt grass is that's a really tough pain in the butt kind of plant. First of all, it's an annual. So it loves the shade. I recommend, and you know, we've dealt with it on acres, so there's really not a good answer, but you can use an herbicide if you have to early on to kill it, and then it'll reemerge from other seed, because the seed bank on that can be 5+ years. Microstitium, which is the stilt grass, it will seed at the end of the season, so it goes to seed usually around, I think, President's Day, I believe. Is that the September? What is?
President's Day is in February. It goes to seed in August,
Is it Columbus
September,
Day?
October.
It's whenever my husband always goes on his man trip every year. That's when I was like, you leave every year when the microstigium's going to seed, and I have to cut it. We go in with weed eaters and we cut it all the way down to the ground. Mow it down before it goes to seed, but your timing on stilt grass has to be just right, because it will seed from little guys. So you have to catch it when it's going to when it's flowering, then you go in and cut it down.
But what do you put in its place so you don't have
You need to heavily
erosion?
mulch. I mean, there's not a plant you can just plant something to make it not come back, because it's growing from seed. So heavily mulch, that will help. I mean, you can plant, but the seeds will still come up around it. And the seed bank on it's 5 or more years. So you have to remove it for at least 5 years to prevent it from coming back.
Can you provide us on the website reference on natives for our area and also invasives so that we will be able to?
So there's already a lot of great websites. Using Georgia Natives is a blog that a friend of mine keeps, and it's awesome. She talks about different plants. She'll highlight them. There's, it's so frustrating because all my slides, this is so different. The other one is georgianatives.net. He's got a great resource on A to Z every month, what it looks like. So that's really helpful. Um,
I will say too, a couple of things about, one thing we're trying to do here in Lincoln Wildlife in 2022 is instead of just having a topic for a meeting, is a theme for a month. So we'll have a lot more communication in Friday news through the month of February about native plants. There's an article in the Echo that will come out this year this month about native plants. So some of these resources, I can get them from Katie and make sure that they're available in Friday news, some of these websites and stuff, and more communication.
And I apologize, I don't have my other slideshow. It has a whole lot of links.
But that way you don't have to know if you wrote it down right.
yeah, and also
Get
on
it
my
out to you.
website, I have a links page that you can go to that has links to other websites too.
What is your website?
NorthGeorgiaNatives.com. And I've got my card.
Yes, yeah.
And y'all come see us. We're open Monday through Saturday. Fridays and Saturdays this spring will be open 9 to 5 and 10 to 3, but then we're open Monday through Thursday by appointment. So send me an email or a text to set up an appointment. We're there 6 days a week. So
Where are you located?
we're in Canton.
It's not on your card.
It's on our website. Yes.
Katie, can you quickly talk about the plants that you brought?
Oh, yes. Okay, so I was told to bring deer-resistant plants.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
The gentleman mentioned the deer
Yes.
and plants that the deer won't eat.
Yes.
Everybody's searching for stuff that the deer don't mow down. And I'm guessing a lot of that doesn't belong here.
So, yeah, yes, especially you'll see, oh gosh, I'm sorry, this is hard. Okay. In the winter, you'll see,
You look into the woods, the plants that are still there currently, those are the plants that the deer won't really eat. Like you'll see mahonia out in the woods, and you'll see ivy, and you'll see beech leaves that are brown, magnolias, deer won't eat. You'll see cedars, deer won't eat. Ferns, evergreen ferns, the deer don't eat those. But as far as more flowering type things, there are plants that deer will resist. However, a hungry, starving animal will do whatever a hungry, starving animal needs to do. So where we live, we're on 12 acres and we're surrounded by large acreage which y'all are too. You've got lots of, we don't necessarily currently have a terrible, terrible deer problem, but like driving in here, I saw 5 deer. And they weren't scared. They were, yeah. So, but there are plants that are going to be more deer resistant. Deer don't like scented things. They don't like flavorful things, really. Like a nodding onion, for instance, is a good example. They don't like the onions. And it's a great plant that flowers. It's a good border plant, kind of plant it at the front of the border. It gets about about a foot tall, 1.5 feet, beautiful pink flowers. Yarrow is another good deer-resistant plant. This one is Ortel's Rose, has pink flowers. Bee Balm is a good deer-resistant plant. However, starving deer will taste it. They probably won't really eat it. So if you have a tiny little plant, it might just go chomp, but it's probably not going to, once it gets established, it won't kill it. And then other things you can do is plant kind of like ground covers. They won't really be as attracted to because deer are browsers. So a browser is going to be, and they're also, what's the word when they're always on the lookout for being attacked? They're aware, So they don't like to look down for super long times. They're always kind of like whoop, looking up. So I always tell people planting things that are taller is helpful and planting things that are really low. So little ground covers, blue moon phlox is a good shade ground cover. Mouse-eared coreopsis is a good full sun ground cover. Green and gold. The baptisias are all pretty deer resistant. One of my favorite plants
is the Fleur's Nemesis, which is Burkelia cordifolia. This is a very rare plant in Georgia. Only occurs in one county down in South Georgia. But, so I loved it because I just love the flowers. It blooms this beautiful pink color late summer. And it grows in the shade and it can grow in the sun. But I planted some out in the garden where we have a pretty high deer pressure. And I was like, let's just see what happens. The deer ate the spicebush, the sweet shrub, the mountain mint, but they did not eat my Burkelia. And it was this tall and covered in flowers. I was like, what? So this is a super cool plant if you're looking for something for some color. Buckeyes, red buckeyes, those are a great small tree, very deer resistant. Dutchman's pipe is fairly deer resistant. And then grasses, native grasses are all deer resistant. Ferns, which I didn't bring any ferns with me right now because mine are still growing. Yeah. And we've got all this stuff out there too. So.
Yeah. All right, so a couple things as we wrap up. Any other questions for Katie? As Katie said, there are plants that she's brought outside here, so I hope that you take the chance to look through them, pick up a few, and share your experiences with your neighbors. You know, with social media, let us know. Send it to bentrylw@gmail.com. Pictures, how it's going, where you planted it, what you're having success with. And we will try to gather up this expertise that people have and what's worked in the shade, in the sun, and a slope, a north slope, a west slope. You know, there's all these things that matter to it. So there's that. Vote if you haven't. See Megan about t-shirts. And lastly, our quiz. Okay, Monarch Butterflies need what? Don't shout it out. Raise your hand. Monarch Butterflies need milkweed. All right, we have choices of prizes. Native Trees of Georgia book, I Love Bent Tree bumper sticker, or Life is Good. Keep it simple. Native Trees. Native Trees. Let's pass that back. Thank you. All right. How many caterpillar species are hosted on a crepe myrtle? Zero. That's right. What would you like, Linda?
You still have the book?
I have another book. I have one more book. I have more of these too, so I'll bring them next time. All right. And what species of tree hosts the most types of caterpillars? Back in the back. Oak. Correct. I Love Bent Tree or Life's Good. Keep it simple. All right. Okay, I think that we're done for today. I appreciate your attendance. Thank you, Jason. All right, y'all know the drill. If you have a choice between going to check out the native plants or putting your chair up, you have a pass on putting your chair up. Go check out the native plants. Oh, and if you want to community directors, they're out here in the hallway. They're available. So before you leave, they're up. So, get your names in.